He put himself, his time, and what is time? Time is your life. If you put time into something, and indeed, that is something very, very central and beautiful. The fact that we do that, there's actually a mitzvah, there's a commandment in the Torah to pay your worker on time. If you had no prior agreement, you must pay the worker before the sun sets. Before sunset. Does work for you? Pay him. If you have a prior agreement, okay, whenever it is, 30 days, whatever the agreement is, but you must, it's actually one of the 613 commandments to pay the worker on time. And unusually, the Torah gives a reason for it. Usually Torah doesn't give a reason for the commandment. Here it does give a reason. It says, you know why you must pay the worker on time? Because he gave his very life for you. What do you mean he gave his life for you? Yeah, he gave you time. What is time? That's a part of his life. So in that sense, and there was a great rabbi, Chaim Soloveitchik. You may have heard of him, Chaim Soloveitchik from Brest-Litovsk in Lithuania, early 20th century. Chaim Soloveitchik, in his analysis of the ideas of paying a worker, he says, it sounds almost socialist, so excuse me, but he says that when someone works in your property, your factory, your farm, they invest themselves in it, investing of the self and of life into something, they actually acquire a portion of it. When you pay them the wage, the salary, you're type of buying off, you're buying back that portion. The very fact that they gave life and time to you, to whatever it is they're working in, means to some degree they have ownership in that. They have a percentage of that. My paying them their wage, their salary, is type of buying back from them that percentage. So wow, that's something incredible. And that's what the Torah means when it says you must pay that worker on time, because for this, he gave his life. But it goes a little deeper and a little further back than that. This idea of possession, and when we possess things, it's almost like with a baby. My daughter and son-in-law and 4 grandchildren were just visiting us from Israel the past 2 weeks. Child-proof the house, they got in anyway. But in any case, but you see, even with little babies, there's an instinct to grab stuff and to keep it, right? Animals have this instinct, but with animals, it's territorial. It's usually something which is food-based. It's usually something they need for survival. It's not usually just, oh, that's cool. No, animals don't do that. Humans, though, we like to possess things. And we have to ask ourselves, why is that seen to be built into the soul? What's spiritual about that? And I think one answer, I can't say the only answer, but one answer to this goes all the way back to the whole idea of the purpose of creation. RabbiMordechai Luzzatto, great Italian Jewish philosopher from Padua, Italy, early 18th century. RabbiMordechai Luzzatto, we call him the Ramchal. Jews don't have time, so we do abbreviations for everything, but the Ramchal, Rambam, etc. The Ria, Rabbi Yehuda Alban, right? So we use abbreviations. So the Ramchal, RabbiMordechai Luzzatto, he actually says something fascinating. He says, look, in as much as we believe and know that God is perfect and complete and self-contained and independent, that means if he does anything, like create the universe, the world, us, he's not doing it because he needs it for himself. He's doing it because he wants to give to the other. We are the other. God wants to give. There's a verse in Psalms, famous verse, that the world is built on chesed. Chesed means pure loving kindness, the desire to give. But in order to give, God wants to give the perfect gift. The perfect gift, obviously, must be God himself, because he's the only perfection that exists. So the perfect gift available to the creature, us, is a closeness, a relationship with God. But to have the joy and the pleasure of a relationship requires compatibility. Coca-Cola competition a while back, is a long time ago. Competition was, you look at the Coke bottle, it's a little competition, you open the lid and it says, if you win, it says you've won. If you lose, it says try again. Actually had a guy at my house, college student in my house. He opens the Coke bottle, he looks at it, it says try again, so he closes it, he opens it. It's just like, dude, this is not working. Anyway, I don't know what he was on, but in any case, Coca-Cola competition was that if you got the winning cap, you got to spend 2 days with the Beastie Boys. 2 entire days chilling with the Beastie Boys. I assume second prize was 4 days. In any case, I saw at the time the Berlin Philharmonic was playing in New York, conducted by the famous German conductor Herbert von Karajan. So Herbert von Karajan just finished, and I imagined this following scenario. Herbert von Karajan has just finished a Beethoven concert, and he goose steps backstage and gets a Coke from the machine. He opens it up. It says, "You have won." It's German. It says, "You have won." He looks at the side. He says, "Today's mit them Beastie Boys." Now, the Beastie Boys are Jewish boys from Brooklyn. They're rockers. Herbert von Karajan, Beastie Boy. It's not going to work well. This is not going to be first. This is going to be hell for both parties. So in order to enjoy the closeness, in order to enjoy a relationship, there's got to be compatibility. There's got to be similarity, unlike Herbert and the Beastie Boys. So for us to have a compatibility with God means that we too have to work on being independent. We have to work on not being takers, because God doesn't take, but on being givers. To work on earning. In other words, that's why God didn't just give it to us. He didn't just create us as perfect, with some obvious exceptions, but he didn't just create us as these perfect beings with a relationship with God already there, because that would mean that we'd be incompatible with God. Because if you're created that way, you are completely a recipient. You haven't done anything. You haven't earned anything. You haven't created. So for God to enable us to have a relationship with him requires logically that he enables us to be like him, to be God-like. He enables us to actually, so whatever good we have, it has to be earned, because if it's given to me, that's not like God. It's like the great philosopher Socrates, who said to do is to be. Shakespeare asked, to be or not to be. Jean-Paul Sartre said, to be is to do. Frank Sinatra said, doobie-doobie-doo. But Frank also said, I did it my way. Correct. You've read RabbiMordechai Luzzatto, right? Frank, no doubt, referring to his fellow Italian philosopher, Luzzatto, is referring to the idea that if you do something and it comes from within, then it's truly yours. If it's given to you, if it's granted to you, if it's gifted to you, it doesn't mean that much. But if it's something you work for, and therefore the whole of reality, the whole of creation, the whole of the human process, and this whole complex that God created is all based on the idea of earning our keep, of working, and then, as in the words of RabbiMordechai Luzzatto, the way he puts it, he says, good that I achieved through my own efforts, only that good is truly mine. Only that good is truly mine. Good, perfection that was granted to me, given to me, not really mine. Self that was given to me is not self. And therefore, God creates us in such a way that we have, in the words of the great Kotzker Rebbe, 19th century Poland, Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, he put it very poetically in the Hebrew. He said, Regel achat b'rakia shvi'it, regel achat b'sha'ol tahtit, which in English means 1 foot in the 7th heaven, 1 foot in the depths of hell. And he says, only someone who has got both feet in both places is a human. I could go either way. And when I choose to go one way, it's I who choose it. And that choice and what I gain from that is mine. And that is, I think, the inner meaning, the deeper meaning, the philosophical concept behind possession, behind wealth, behind the fact that we enjoy that, which is okay, it's legit. The fact that we want to have things, it's okay. And indeed, it is part of the very nature of the human being. But as I said, that wealth can have an anvil attached, because it does create a responsibility. And the human responsibility is major. There is another ancient midrash, again, as I said, 2nd century, which says that when God created the world, he took Adam and Eve on a tour, showed them around. Is this not beautiful? And they said, well, pretty nice, yeah. And he said, look at this. He showed them the whole world, and they say, yeah, no worries, mate. And God says, be careful not to destroy it. He says, because the only creature who is capable of destroying this world is you, Adam and Eve. The human being is capable of creation in this incredible way, as we've mentioned, but is also capable of destruction. And many, many times the Torah actually discusses this idea of preservation of creation, preservation of the natural world. There was a Rav Kook, who was the chief rabbi of Israel when it was still called Palestine before 1948. And he was walking in Akko, north of Tel Aviv. He's walking with a student of his, Rabbi Aryeh Levine. And as they're walking along, I don't know if you've ever done this, but you walk along, you pull a leaf off the tree. Anyone ever done that? You don't have to admit it publicly, but you know. Okay. So he walks, his student pulls a leaf off the tree, and Rav Kook stops. And he says, what are you doing? He says, what do you mean? Nothing. He said, you just disturbed a living creature for no reason whatsoever. He says, every leaf, every grain of grass, every animal has some purpose in this world. Every part of creation is calculated. Everything in the world fits together in a beautiful harmony. When you go, I was in last summer, I was in the Serengeti. We went to see the great migration of the mega herd of wildebeests and zebras heading north across the Mara River into Kenya, where the grass is in fact greener. And it's an unbelievable sight, absolutely incredible to see this. And when you see something like that, you begin to realize the intricacy and the symbiosis in creation. You know, the zebras and the wildebeest hang out together because they have different types of teeth. And the zebra teeth are suited for the lower layers of grass, and the wildebeest's teeth are suited for the higher layers of grass. So after the wildebeest go through and they eat the higher layers of grass, the zebras happily now eat what's left underneath. And they're working together. You see this often. You see, we saw a little slightly gross, but a warthog. Actually, warthogs are not so bad, but warthogs often get infested with insects. And it really drives them crazy because warthog, you know, if you've got hooves, you can't get it off. I've never tried, but I can imagine that it'd be hard. So there are mongooses. Mongooses eat insects. When a warthog gets sufficiently bothered by the insects, it seeks out a group of mongooses. They're not mongoose, they're mongooses. And it will lie down in the middle. They'll swarm it and have this all-you-can-eat buffet, and everyone's happy. The warthog gets up, it is pristine and clean. The mongoose are full with excellent protein, and everyone is happy. That symbiosis just tells us that there's a design here which tells us we have to be in a type of a symbiosis as well. We don't have always the same likes and dislikes. We don't all have the same tastes. We don't all have the same beliefs, but there's a symbiosis that's required for us to live together on this earth, to live together as people, to live together with the rest of creation. And that's something which the Torah wants us to recognize. Going on hikes, you know, I know one of my sons just graduated this afternoon, but he was in the paratroops in the Israeli IDF. I have 3 of my sons served in the IDF combat units. So one was a Givati sniper, one was in field intelligence, one was a paratrooper. So the paratrooper asked him, what was the best part of your service? What's the best part of your service? He says, the best part was Lebanon. He was on the border with Lebanon. It's not really a border, it's just a line on a computer screen. You can't, there's no fence. And he's on one of the highest peaks in Israel. He says it was actually above the clouds. Down below, there's a Hezbollah base who are continuously training to attack us. He knew that base, their job was to take over his base. But he said he'd have a 4-hour guard duty on this peak overlooking Lebanon, clouds below him, and there was an eagle. Actually, it was an Egyptian vulture with very long wingspan that would like float up and look at him. So every morning he'd have this, like, he says it was meditative. He said, be standing there looking at the clouds, and then this vulture would float up and just be looking at him. He'd be looking at it. And he said, I felt a bond with her. It was like bizarre. So, but there's something beautiful about that type of, sometimes you can see in nature and you can see in the world, and it's interesting, there's a blessing. Some of you may be familiar with the prayer book. If not, please contact Rabbi Alban, he'll teach it to you. But there's a whole line of blessings we say in the morning. The first of this series of blessing is the most puzzling. It says this: blessed are you, our God, King of the universe. That's not puzzling, that's cool, right? Asher natan lasechvi vina, that you gave wisdom to the rooster to distinguish between day and night. So the Talmud tells us that when you wake up, when you hear the rooster crow, you wake up, you should say this blessing: blessed are our God who gave the rooster wisdom to distinguish between day and night. Now, I will tell you, if I hear a rooster crowing at 5 in the morning, the only blessing I want to make is on shechita, which is a ritual slaughter of an animal. I'm not saying, oh, thank God for the rooster. No. So what is the meaning of this bizarre blessing? You wake up, and a lot of us say it, but a lot of people say it by rote. We don't really think about it because we've said it so much. But when you say it out loud, especially if you say it in English, you say, thank God for giving the rooster wisdom to distinguish between. What? What's going on? Rabbi Kook, in his commentary on the Siddur, commentary on the prayer book, he says the following. He says that the rooster crowing and waking you up is just the first manifestation of the interconnection between the human and all of creation. Here's this rooster. Why is it crowing? It's not waking up the other roosters. They're already awake. It's not waking up the hens. They'll kill it. It is not crowing in order to avoid predators. That is no. You have to be quiet. You want to avoid predators. Why is it crowing? It wakes me up. Wakes up the human to their day of work. There's a connection. It's really just the tip of the iceberg of all of this interconnectivity between the human being and all of creation. And when you go out into nature, you hike, you camp, you see this, you're able to see that type of interconnection. You're able to feel something. I don't know, I've been whale watching many, many times. I love whales, right? Although orcas, a little bit different. They've sunk orcas, a pod of orcas has been sinking ships, attacking ships around Gibraltar. One of the orcas was hit by a boat, which must have traumatized her, and she has recruited the pod. They've sunk 3 yachts so far, pod of orcas. But what's interesting is they haven't eaten the humans in the water. It's like, we've done enough, that's it. Revenge on the boat, okay. But whales will often recognize humans. Whales will perform for humans. Dolphins will perform for humans. Whales will come up next to the boat, and there's a little bit of contact there. It's something incredible, something very deep. And we see that in nature. And when you go out on a hike, it's something incredible. What do we learn from nature? The Talmud tells us that we can learn from everything in nature. Be as strong. The code of Jewish law begins with some metaphor. Someone mentioned metaphors, yeah, right? Never metaphor I didn't like, but it begins with some animal metaphors to teach us things. It says you should be as audacious as a leopard. You might know that leopards are audacious, chutzpah-filled creatures. They will attack things 10 times their size. They have no fear whatsoever. A Jew is exhorted at the beginning of the Code of Jewish Law to be audacious, holy chutzpah. Meaning not to care about the rest of the world says about me. I don't care, right? I believe I'm doing the right thing. I have that type of chutzpah, which just takes a lot of chutzpah. Think about it. What percentage of the Jewish people of the world's population, right? What percent? Israel's tiny country, and yet, right, we're able to stand. Take some chutzpah, take some audaciousness. Then it says, be as strong as a lion, powerful, gibor, as powerful as a lion. How can a human be as powerful as a lion? They are the apex predator in Africa. There's nothing better. There are animals faster, there are animals stronger, but the combination of speed and agility and strength is incredible. There were two lions. Just tell you a side story. Do we have time? Yes. A side story. There was the British were building a railway bridge in the early 20th century over the Tsavo River Gorge in Kenya. And it was a huge project. It's probably before the First World War, 1910 or so. And there were two lions who were literally preying upon the workers in this project. They killed over 200 workers over the course of over 2 years. And they could not catch them. They'd been shot numerous times. The lions completely seemed to be fine. The wounds healed, nothing. Eventually, an Irish colonel called Jonathan Patterson was brought to Kenya to take care of this. And the British didn't really care about the workers, but they cared about the project. British, why the sun never set on the British Empire? So God doesn't trust them in the dark. So in any case, they bring in Colonel Jonathan Patterson, and he single-handedly hunted down both lions, killed them. They're stuffed, and they're now in the Natural History Museum in New York. I'm sorry? They're in Chicago now? Well, you ripped them off from New York? What happened? All right, okay. All right, so in any case, these two lions were hunted down and killed by Colonel Jonathan Patterson. Was then, when the First World War started, he was moved to Cairo, to Egypt. And he was a Christian Zionist. He believed in the dream of the Jews returning to Israel. He was a believer in the Bible, and he was an excellent soldier. And he was one of the instrumental officers in the British Army pushing to include the Palestinian, who were Jews at the time, Palestinian Jews, to come and join the British Army. Did not want them because they knew if the Jews got military training, they'd start an army, which we did. But they reluctantly agreed. Colonel Jonathan Patterson was one of the forces behind the creation of the Jewish Brigade, or not Jewish Brigade, the Second World War, but the Zion Mule Corps in the First, Zion Transport Corps in the First World War. He also pushed for them to have the right to have Hebrew on their insignias and for them to have kosher food. An amazing guy. He became friendly with a professor of medieval history who was the world's leading expert on the Spanish Inquisition. His name was Ben-Sion Netanyahu, Professor Ben-Sion Netanyahu. Professor Netanyahu's son is the current Prime Minister of Israel. Ben-Sion Netanyahu became a professor at Cornell, but he was so enamored and he admired so much Colonel Patterson that he named his first son after him. So you may have heard of Yonatan Netanyahu, who was killed not far from the Tsavo River at the raid on Entebbe to save the hostages. And he was named after Jonathan Patterson. Jonathan Patterson eventually retired and was buried in the United States, but they found in his last will and testimony that he wanted to be reinterred in Israel. They gave him a full military ceremony in Israel, where he's buried in the British military cemetery in Jerusalem, Colonel Jonathan Patterson. But brief diversion from the lions, but well worth it. So what do we learn from, what does it mean to be as powerful? Gibor. What does it mean to be Gibor? Gibor means strong as a lion. No one, it's not possible. You can't do it. So it's interesting, if you look there's a section of the Mishnah called Pirkei Avot, chapters of the fathers, usually incorrectly called ethics of the fathers, but chapters of the fathers. And in that, it says, Eizehu Gibor, what is the definition of a courageous, powerful, strong person? So it says there in the Mishnah, it says the definition of a Gibor, a hero, is not one who conquers a city, not one who defeats someone else in battle, but rather one who controls and conquers themselves. That is the greatest power, because all other measures are relative. There could be someone stronger than you. You do MMA, right? Karate, etc. Full contact, black belt, right? Whatever, right? You do karate. So there could always be someone a little better than you, right? But the idea of conquest of self-control, exercising of free will, which is what we discussed before, that is what it means to be as powerful as a lion. Where do lions exhibit self-control? How do lions exhibit? The answer is very simple. When you go to the Serengeti and you see prides of lions, you realize lions are the only predatory cats that live in groups. But the only way lions can live in groups is if they control themselves. If the lions would not control themselves, if they'd unleash their full power and anger on each other, if they'd unleash all of their hunting skills on each other, they would not survive. It would implode. They'd destroy each other. The only way lions can live in a pride and in a group is for the lions to have self-control. And that is it means, that's what it means, Gibor Kari, be as heroic as a lion. There's a tremendous amount we can learn from nature. And we'll end. Israel, as you might know, is the world's, maybe, possibly, the greatest transition point for bird migration in the world. Tens of millions of birds migrate across the skies of Israel twice a year. The Israeli Air Force has special radar and spotting stations dedicated to tracking birds because of their danger to the jets, not to mention what the jets do to the birds. But generally, there are special reservoirs and there are special plantations for the birds to nest in and eat, because otherwise they'll destroy all the farms in Israel. It's unbelievable. And therefore, it's not by coincidence that the only animal migration ever mentioned in the entire 24 books of the Torah, prophets, and writings is bird migration. And the prophet Jeremiah uses it to rebuke the Jewish people. He did that a lot, right? To rebuke the Jewish people. He had these lengthy sermons, and there was a Lutheran pastor in Minnesota who was infamous for his lengthy sermons on Sundays. And in the middle of one of his sermons, a guy gets up, leaves the church, comes back at the end of the sermon, he's had a haircut. So after church, this pastor goes over to him and he says, "I don't believe it. You left in the middle of my sermon to get a haircut?" The guy said, "At the beginning, I didn't need one." So Jeremiah gives some lengthy speeches and sermons to the Jewish people. And one of his rebukes is that he says birds travel. He doesn't use the term miles, but birds travel thousands and thousands of miles. They migrate from one continent to another, Europe to Africa. It's unbelievable. They don't lose their way. They know exactly where they're going. Right? The wildebeests migrate across Tanzania to Kenya. They don't lose their way. You don't see like lost wildebeest all over it. Right? Yeah, he says, "You, my people, have lost your way." But there is something, I want to say, there's a homing signal that we have that has been planted in us. I don't know if it's genetic or spiritual or cultural. Maybe it's a combination of all three, that we tend to gravitate towards the Torah. It may be later in life, maybe earlier in life, but there's something when we study Torah, and I'm sure you've all had this experience when you've studied Torah with the wonderful people in Torah Hub here, Rabbi Albin, who I've known for so many years, both Rabbi Albins, actually the other one I didn't know, but okay, the younger Albin, right? But in any case, right, Rabbi Albin and I have known each other since the 1980s. It's hard to, your son probably can't even imagine that, but okay. Right. But in any case, right, when you study Torah, there's something, your soul is hearing something it's heard before. You've been there before. It's familiar territory. And it's the reason it's familiar territory is because we stood together at Mount Sinai 3,333 years ago, approximately, and 3 days. And we stood together and heard it. And that had an indelible impression in our souls. And therefore, when you are studying Torah, whether it's something you've never seen before, maybe it's Aramaic or Hebrew, it doesn't matter. It's the bird migrating and migrating across the land of Israel and really heading home. And I think it is a wonderful, wonderful event to get together people who are fairly diverse crowd. I saw some people without ties. Unbelievable, right? So a fairly diverse crowd. Wonderful to see this, and for everyone to get together here, and certainly to be united by a common love for learning, a love for Torah, a love for putting effort into things, acquiring things in an honest way, acquiring Torah, and being, as I said, Gibor Ka'ari, being as powerful as a lion. That's the goal. Thank you very much.
Becker, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Hi, we hope you enjoyed the content of these videos. And just like at the event, there was no official monetary ask, and there still is no official monetary ask. We do, however, thank all of our sponsors for being a part of this event. We do, however, have an ask of you. The way in which we have been in touch with so many people that are looking for answers inside of their Judaism, so many answers about life's big questions, comes from people that were inspired just like you. So we ask you, if you know of 1 to 2 people, if you know more, great. But if you know of at least 1 to 2 people that you feel could also be inspired, either from this video content or by being in touch with one of the people on our staff, please start an email right now. Please start a text message right now and say, hey, such and such, I have an opportunity you might be interested in. And that's all it takes, is it takes a spark of interest that puts in touch, that can make a lasting relationship that could go for years, it could go for decades. So please, this is our ask. If you wouldn't mind thinking of 1 to 2 people and putting somebody on staff over here in touch with one of the people that you think could be inspired by the content we're producing. Thank you very much.